Oi, mate! Get out from that bush, he shouted with a rigidity that betrayed a modest amount of fear. You startled me half to death, coming around the bend of my own drive and me seeing such an unfamiliar face in a place where he ought to not be any face. Jesper quickly contemplated running. The man was much older and his dress was suitable for courtly behavior, not dashing through the bramble and mud. I was picking berries. Jesper raised the half-filled basket up to allow the driver to see the proof of his words. The demeanor of the man suddenly changed. It was change that Jesper was familiar with. He had many times seen the same stern expression on the most fiendish bandits melt away when presented with a berry basket. Any suspicions that the driver might have had instantly evaporated, for even the notion of a member of unholy hounds picking berries seemed farcical. The softened expression even made allowances for a smile. Berries, eh? Say, you couldn't have picked a better spot for them, could you? I used to pick berries here as a boy. Jesper took his cue to finally step forward out of the bush, proudly brandishing his basket. I know, and what luck I found them. I have only just begun picking, and look how many I have. It would have taken me fourfold the time to come back to procure this number. The driver bent over for a closer look, and where's your home, boy? Is it quite far? Jesper replied with a scripted response, a little south of Tanner Folk, just past the burnt woods. My God, that is far. You couldn't have come all the way this morning. It was true. Tanner Folk was in the exact opposite direction Jesper just traveled, and while the response would seem perfectly reasonable in a location closer to Blackbridge Canyon, you could see why it might seem less believable here. Sorry, I have traveled much further for much less profit. I dare say there's no distance yet made by a man that would not be worth taking for a prize such as these. Surely you have tested them yourself. Jesper felt happier with his response, as it seemed to amplify the man's smile. In my youth often, but perhaps I took it for granted because I never had to travel very far, and even then my father would always drive us here in our carriage, so I'm ashamed I never had to walk such a stretch to earn an equal reward. It was Jesper's time to smile. Then let my efforts reward us both today. He raised the basket even higher. A taste in memory of your youth, sir. That's my page for a second. The driver chuckled and removed one glove, bending over the seat to reach down to the basket. At the moment his fingers touched the first berry, the dagger in turn met his throat, cutting through a superficial layer of skin and drawing blood. Jesper caught the man's startled eyes, and for that taste I will have your purse, sir, in memory of my youth. The driver's arm had gone stiff, his chin raised and trembling, more frightened than he had ever been before. Whether unable to incapable of speaking, he did not respond to the boy. Perhaps he did not think his jaw could afford to be engaged in his particular time. Jesper let the basket drop, freeing his other hand to probe the man's pockets. Jesus. This took a turn. I thought he was like an innocent little guy. Do not mistake me, sir. I will not kill you if you give me no cause, though I will admit the thought of taking your carriage and leaving you with the indignity of walking appeals to me. Unable to find a purse on the man's coat, Jesper pivoted to search the seat under him. Why have you no purse upon your person? The driver slowly raised his hand cautiously, pointing to where the carriage door behind him. Jesper lowered the knife's edge a small degree to allow the man to speak, which he did, and turned softly. There was a lockbox in the carriage. Well, come down then, and grant me the courtesy of sparing your life and binding your hands, a concession I assure you of my tender heart, for it would be much easier to slit your throat. The man started to comply, slowly lowering himself from the driver's seat out of the carriage. Once down, Jesper guided him from the carriage to a nearby tree, and instructed him to get on his knees and put his hands behind his back. Excusing his inexperience, the man indulged Jesper while he figured out how to adequately bind him. The smile and kindness Jesper had seen on the man's face now nothing more than a distant memory. In place, cold, dark eyes displaying no emotion. I wonder, should I grant you the same clemency you were showing me? Jesper stopped, surprised by the question, but ignored it. Secured the final binding and then hastily returned to the carriage. With one hand on the door handle, he turned back to the man. If there's no lockbox, there will be no clemency. Inside the carriage was surprisingly dusty and unswept, a stark contrast to the elegant, polished golden facade of the exterior. It had apparently been too many years since a passenger had enjoyed a ride in this vehicle. This all but confirmed what Jesper had suspected. The driver of this carriage was not a liveried servant in the employ of some great master. Any curiosity of this observation might have had produced was quickly abandoned upon seeing what rested under the carriage's back seat, a large wooden lockbox. Despite its hefty appearance, the box was surprisingly easy to handle. Within a few minutes, Jesper had dislodged it from its holding and carried it out to the sunlight. Inspecting the box carefully, two observations were made. Totemic symbols found carved on the four sides of the box hinted that the box was very old and likely not created by our Indian hands. It reminded him of artifacts from the old world and was presumably crafted in one of the ancient realms. Secondly, the box was secured by a rusted yet robust padlock and would not open easily without a key. Jesper looked over to see the driver quietly observing from his indentured position. Do you perhaps have a key you can provide me to open this box? Without emotion, the driver replied, There is no key to that box. Jesper stood up. Easy enough, then? He headed over to a nearby rock of sizable dimensions and lifted the stone up, carrying it back to the box. If there was ever a time when the lock had to be resistant to brute force, it wasn't recent. With one hit, the stone had completely shattered the rusted lock. He bent back and opened the lid. Inside was an effigy, a crude figure chiseled from stone. Without too much deliberation, Jesper bent down and picked it up, somewhat surprised how heavy it seemed, given how light the box felt. Having expected to find something more akin to gold or gems, he looked questioningly to the man, hoping to find an explanation. The driver's smile had once again returned. "You are cursed, boy, for deadly is the stone. You have opened that which should never have been opened, and you are cursed." Wait, isn't this the curse box in the shrine room? Question mark? Just do it tomorrow, Stricken. For whoever you want. It is? This might be how to open that. Jesper carried the effigy to the man and shoved it in front of his face. "What is it?" "That's one." Feeling his disappointment rising to anger now, Jesper tightened his grip on the effigy. "On what, you mumbling Agentor? And in God's name, why have you no purse upon your person?" The man did not seem intimidated. "One pace." He paused for effect. 12 more and you will be dead." He only had a second to flinch before the effigy struck him in the head and put an end to his cryptic ramblings. If there was ever a time the old man had been resistant to brute force, it wasn't recent. Jesper looked down at the sculpted stone figure, now splattered in red. Was it cursed? Was he cursed? He had, of course, heard stories of curses and had never doubted their validity in the past, but now that he was standing face to face with the possibility of being cursed, his mind pleaded with him to be skeptical. And if he was cursed, what difference would the knowledge make? A dozen more paces would not be enough to find another living soul. He says nothing of his chance of preparing a remedy. If he did not move from where he was now stood, he could live maybe another 3 or 4 days, maybe given more the abundance of nearby berries. A plan that, if we ignore its obvious faults, might provide additional opportunity for help to come along. But what good would that do? To be discovered here, beside a body, stolen goods in hand, bloated from berries, and raving about a curse that could very well be not be real. No, it would at most be certainly better to face one's fate now, take a dozen paces, and see if life goes on. But Jesper found his legs unable to make that first step. His mind was unable to convince his limb to waste away in 1/12 of his life in a single motion. Feeling the desperation sink in, he hopelessly looked about him for a solution, and if, by some stroke of luck of the gods, had heard his plea, a miracle materialized before him as he found himself suddenly at the end of a fairy tale. 2 white horses in a carriage of gold trim were beside him. The answer to his immediate prayers. He laughed at his fortune and calculated a short number of paces back to the road. 4. Perhaps only 3 if he jumped. He made a quick survey to see if there was anything he wished to grab before taking the plunge. My little one. He thought about removing the driver's fancy coat, as that appeared to be of some value, but the additional risk of undertaking such a task took great chance. And so after a profound breath, he took his 3rd and 4th steps, though they were quite large. Seated now behind the horses, he reached for the reins and suddenly realized that he was still gripping the effigy. If the curse was real, then it would most certainly be better left here. If, on the other hand, the story is fictitious, there might be some appraisal that could be made of the figure. It was, after all, found within a lockbox whose typical function serves for objects of value. Having witnessed firsthand the horrors of destitution, Jesper found his mind equally reluctant to allow his hand to let go. If it is cursed, I die. If not today, then tomorrow. And if I die, what care have I? And with that statement said aloud to the horses seemingly, Jesper took up the reins with confidence. Part 2 of 47. Miller awoke to some light nudging from a familiar foot. Only one person would have cheek to awaken her in such ill-mannered fashion. Shaking her sleep from her eyes, she glared up at him in darkness, but did not say a word. He nudged her again, teasingly, and then stepped back into the dim. After taking a moment for her eyes to adjust in the darkness of the cave, Miller remembered she was on 3rd watch today, quietly collecting her things and wits. Miller turned as she left, waving to her young friend, who was more than likely already asleep. She crept through the cavern's main passage, careful not to wake the sleeping bandits around her. Like a hero in a book, she often mused. Quietly, she grabbed a bow from the haphazardly formed pile of weapons, shaking the accompanying quiver in the darkness to assess how many arrows it held. She then walked towards the sun-drenched mouth of the cavern, ready to start her shift. Above her, in one of the few trees found in the canyon, Miller could see that Ravio was already posted. She waved and Ravio waved back, calling out to each other. It was strictly forbidden. Anything louder than a gesture in the canyon was forbidden. When Miller reached the tree, Ravio lowered a branded a braided rope and pointed to the ground behind her. Miller turned following the finger and saw a pail of water resting beside a nearby log. She turned back to Ravia, nodded, and secured the pail to the rope. The pail went up first, and then, in turn, Miller followed. Ravia reached across to grab the water. Miller leaned back to give her space. There was not much room for maneuvering in a tree post, a necessary concession for the concealment of outpost demanded. Ravia tilted the pail up to her mouth dramatically, illustrating how thirsty she had been. Miller laughed silently as water poured out, splashing into Ravia's face. It was a bit too daring and noisy of a joke. If the others had been around, they would have certainly been scolded for unwarranted sound. But Miller appreciated the efforts Ravia took to verbalize the silence of the morning. They had been on third watch together for over a month, and during that speechless time, their friendship grown into something special. Affection was unsurprisingly scarce among the unholy hounds. She had felt a camaraderie before, of course, but intimacy, never. From their elevated vantage, the girls could see both the concealed entrance of the cavern as well as the clear view of Blackbridge that spanned across the canyon. Blackbridge was a link between the Gentrylands and the northern mountains that overpassed the connected Horse and Reddington. For the city-faring travelers of the realm, the bridge was an unavoidable crossing. In the day, the task was set to venture the travelers past without incident stopping by. At night, the task was to ensure that they do. Like most of their band, Miller preferred to the night. The biting glare of the sun might be tolerable to farmhands and bricklayers, but to a cavern-housed bandit, it was a source of constant annoyance. In the day, there was no shroud to conceal. They're good gamers. In the day, there was no shroud to conceal her expressions nor to hide their thoughts. She felt exposed. Ravia touched her elbow and pointed up. Miller, striving to suppress a budding smile, suddenly shook her head in response. There were many signs that the unholy hounds used in lieu of words, but the two of them had developed an extended vocabulary. Gestures quietly forwarded in the shared solitude of their month. Among the branches, she watched as Ravia shifted, placing her palms flat on the floorboards beneath them. Miller knew that she was trying to say, but shook her head a second time. It was often more to pretend not to understand. Ravia rolled her eyes and turned away, looking back to the canyon. Squinting through the leaves, the two girls held still, watching and listening. It was not long until Miller, too, heard the sounds of approach. Ravia held up two bent fingers, and a few moments later, two men emerged from the bridge's southern end. They were dressed in a familiar uniform, long gray coats with black facings, white waistcoats, and black tricorn hats. They belonged to the local patrol, the Blackguard. Although not an everyday occurrence, the presence of the Blackguard wasn't an unusual sight. It typically indicated an important traveler's impending passage across the bridge, information that the girls would probably relay to their leaders as soon as the coast was clear. But this report, while exciting, was rarely acted upon. In Miller's 5 years in the Unholy Hounds, she had never once seen a carriage taken in open daylight when the Blackguard was nearby. The men had nearly reached the bridge's north end when Miller heard the horses, faintly at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. Ravia's eyes met Miller's, the same concern mirrored in each other's expression. They did not sound like the typical carriage. Cautiously approaching the bridge to cross, instead of the familiar crunch of the high road's gravel, they heard the harsh clattering of hoofbeats against stone. Both girls quickly redirected their attention downwards, looking through the foliage. The sounds were not coming from the high road, but from the canyon itself. The horses were coming below the bridge. In an instant, Miller had knocked an arrow and drawn her bow. Go! Ravia was gone before the whisper had even left Miller's mouth. The young scout was already sliding down the bank below, racing towards the cave. There was no road that ran below the canyon. There was no reason for numerous horses to be approaching their cave. There was only one reason in conclusion, and both girls had to reach it instantly. The base had been compromised. There was a Blackguard attack. The moment the horses came into view, Miller let loose her first arrow. She was surprised to see a carriage. She had expected cavalry. Before she even finished processing that horror, a second arrow was in the air. Without a trail, it would be unthinkable for a carriage to traverse such rough terrain, yet she watched as the wheels jolted over the rocky riverbed. A third arrow was now in flight, and there would be no need for a fourth. The driver slumped over just moments before the vehicle dipped into a small ditch, slamming into an embankment. The force of his sudden halt immediately shattered the front wheels and catapulted the driver from his seat. Utterly confused now, Miller glanced quickly over her shoulder to see if any horses were also approaching from the rear. Down in the canyon, the entire horde of the Unholy Hounds came spilling forth from the earth, as if hell itself had suddenly sprung open. The group seemed even more bewildered than Miller, half asleep and tripping over one another in a desperate attempt to engage an unseen enemy in combat. Miller could see Ravia among her number, the only one looking up at her. Her expression was chilling. There was no need for a silent gesture to convey what they both now realized. They had made a mistake. The gang's chieftain, Jeffrey Heartslasher, led the others, cautiously approaching the crashed carriage like a suspicious fox would near a baited trap. There were no words exchanged as the group crept forward in the customary silence. A dozen or so paces in the front of the wreckage lay the far-flung driver, an arrow protruding from his broken body. and beside him a blood-stained effigy carved from stone. Miller was inconsolable. Jesper had always been her favorite. He had always shadowed her in the night, clinging to him for every move, the way a child tails an older sibling. Tender-hearted, she had always called him, though deep down she had known that wasn't quite true. His appearance of gentleness concealed the raw, resilient durability that emerged in the most perilous of situations. He had been a flower among the nettles of his cave, but he still had thorns honed by a grim past and hundreds of hands of misfortune. They buried him in the darkness in the back of the larger cavern rooms. He was interred by a berry basket and silk handkerchief that he had treasured. The mysterious effigy that I found beside him served as a distinguished gravestone, a marker that stood out somewhat special among the rows of similar swords, marking a neighboring plots. No one spoke, not even in whispers. There was nothing to say. Miller awoke the next day to a thunderous shaking and rattling of the earth, a far cry from the playful nudging of the previous day. She strained to adjust her eyes, but the choking sting of stirred-up dust caused her to flinch. Panic was also in the air. The sounds of the scurried footsteps and clattering feet filled the space around her, but even in this alarm, the silence was louder. What was it that sounded so strange? Miller closed her eyes and used her feet to guide her along the passage. The whispers around her were getting louder, and intense voices could be heard ahead, louder speech than she had ever spoken in the canyon. The growing dread as Miller approached the mouth of the cave, her eyes now opened wide despite the dust. Shouldn't it be day? Miller felt a hand in the darkness pulling at her. It was Ravia. The two embraced, and Miller did not need to see her to understand. Ravia placed two bent fingers against Miller's cheeks, and with that touch against her face, Miller felt the sinking feeling from the previous day. The two bent fingers confirmed that Miller had suspected the girls had forgotten to relay one critical piece of information to the others. An hour or so later, the screams began, blood-curdling cries of hopeless desperation. Captain Fodrick Lee of the Blackguard looked down from the bridge of the canyon to the collapsed entrance of the cave. Ah, he grinned. Now they speak. Well then. Okay, so I think the relevant thing we learned from that, as far as, like, book hints go, is probably that we need to try to open that lockbox when we have 13 steps remaining in that room, maybe? Because that's the curse, 13 steps. That's my guess. I'll make a note of it. But either way, that contained no relevant information for anything else that we're doing currently. Cursed box. 13 steps. Left to open. Totally, what's up, dude? I'll go berry picking. True. So true, bestie. Okay, well, let me keep looking through stuff. We read The Era of Ruin and the History of Verindia. That was the first edition that we read, though. I wonder if... if like the regular edition would have anything else, but yeah, here's that other picture I was talking about, the Does It Never End? Just the same swirl as idea, my friends. We done this one. Let's make a note of that one. I think we have, but might be a clue. There's another book as well, but it's about the sightseeing areas in like the cities and site tours in Fen Aries, which have nothing to do with the different regions. And I remember some of this being on that final exam thing. Trinsdale and all that kind of shit. a ripped up version of the sigil book from early in the game. That is... Oh, wait. These might be of relevance. Children's coloring from grade 1 or 2. We just have to deduce which colors are correct colors for the different flags. If there's any, are there even new ones on here? Oh, there's not even new ones. There's Arch, Ares, Araja, and we now know that this is orange, so never mind. Fuck them kids. Okay, that's it. That's all. Those are all pictures. 2 out of 12, 10 out of 12. This is supposed to be orange, not purple. Yeah. Each color is only used twice. And we know that this is... What color was this in the end? It was yellow. So that's supposed to be yellow. Is supposed to be purple, but like we already have those solved, so that would have been useful earlier. Have we done this one yet? No, this is actually a new one. We haven't done this one yet. So this is 3 of 4 clues for another one. What's your question? So I say this time is like FF14, I think. Read us some books while playing. Probably FF14. Did you do the beta EA of Claire on a controller? Yeah. Okay, this is a new one indeed. The color on this one is pink. And we know this is orange, and we suspect this is purple. Which means that this essentially solution to one of them is... one of these two. We could try it on. Could try it in this one technically. Oh yeah, hold on. And we know this one's flying, right? Wavy means this would make sense for aviation potentially. Wavy means heat. I have a feeling this might be the other one. Not Morajai, but what's it called? So much shit. Vera. No, hold up. We said Morajai was sailing. I lied. Sailing. Naval. Oh, yeah. Naval makes sense for that too. I mean, let's try it. Aviation. So that would be sailing. Squigglies. Oh, fuck's sake. Swirlies. I'm gonna need the flower. No, they're like little circles. Oh, pizza slices. These ones. And square lines. Not this one. Must be the other one then. Okay. But, hold up. What we do know from this is that
So not only did I have to pay $11.50 for this sub thanks to Apple, but the instant I confirmed the payment, Dad just threw up all his water all over the table and I had to clean it up. Fuck my life, man.
Stricken, man, thank you for the 75. Bro, why don't you just wait? I appreciate it, man. I hope your dad's okay, by the way. I hope your dad's okay, dude. Sounds like you're having a rough day. Thank you very much for the sub, dude. You are appreciated. Should have just waited. There's no rush, man. I'm not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. Hope your dad's okay. What's up, Moroku? So what we know from this chat, if it's true that only one symbol in one color per realm for sure, but let's say one symbol per realm as well, it means that this color, pink, and the pizza slices are now taken. Meaning this narrows down our search in the other ones. Are there 8 modes though? There are 8 modes, yes. I mean, I don't know, maybe this did mean aviation. I'll try it one more time. Can't be that one. Can't be that one. Could be turtle, I guess, but doubtful. This is back to this. Aviation didn't connect this stuff, so. Okay, well, this means you're having burritos for dinner. May I have burrito? Like burrito wraps or bowls? So if this is pink, we know the color of that. And the thing is, we don't know the rest of these. All we know is the color of the area. We don't know anything about the weather in Korarica, or whatever it's called. Wraps? May I have some?